Direct from our newsroom in New York, in color, this is the CBS Evening News with Walter Cronkite. And Eric Severide in Washington, Nelson Benton in Bethpage, New York, Bruce Morton in Houston, Texas, Ed Rabel in Houston, Ike Pappas in Denver, Colorado, Dan Rather in Washington, Stephen Rowan in Washington, and Bert Quint in Swai Ring, Cambodia.
Good evening. Apollo 13 astronauts Jim Lovell, Fred Hayes, and John Swigert tonight are heading toward a long loop around the moon and a 3-day voyage home. Their command ship is all but dead after a mysterious accident last night forced cancellation of programmed moon landing. They're banking on dangerously short supplies of oxygen and power and mostly coolant water. This is the way the spacecraft looks now, the LEM and command module still linked nose to nose as it prepares to round the moon for the dark side. That will put them temporarily out of communication, but in an effort to save power, conversation with Earth has been at a minimum anyway. This is their present position on a free return course, which would set them down in the Indian Ocean if they didn't do anything else now to the ship. But a speed-up maneuver scheduled for later tonight would return them instead to a Pacific Ocean splashdown, now scheduled for shortly after noon Friday, Eastern Time, off New Zealand. At a news conference this morning, Flight Director Glenn Lunny said the cause of the accident remains unknown, and then he gave a cautiously optimistic picture of the chances for a safe return.
I don't think anybody fully understands it, but it appeared that something gave way, causing a problem with the fuel cell. Something in the cryogenic tanking gave way, causing then a problem with the fuel cell, probably a physical impact of some kind. To give you some idea where we stand on the LEM consumables, right now, with the water that we have in the lunar module descent and ascent tanks, we can follow the profile that we have intended to follow, that is powering down the primary guidance system after the first burn, and power it up 2 more times for mid-courses, and land with still about 12 or 13 hours of water of cooling available. So that is beginning to look like we are in reasonable shape there. We are also studying some ways, possibly getting some more water into the coolant system, and we're not sure how those are going to work yet. On the batteries, we again are planning to follow a course which will end up with about 500 or so amp hours left, which is about 22% of the current or the power available in the lunar module. So that's beginning to look like a fairly comfortable margin. The command module, which is the portion of the vehicle which will re-enter, is, as near as we can tell, in fine shape. We have electrical power, we have a coolant system, we have a command module RCS system, 2 of them actually, and all the other systems are still in fine shape.
Are the astronauts safe, I think is...
Well, they're safe in the sense that we have the situation stabilized now, we think. I think our only concern about safety is that we're now about 70 hours from home, and we have to continue to keep the situation that way and bring them on home.
And there are a lot of imponderables left. They have to get rid of the now useless service module and then of the lunar modules as they approach the Earth's atmosphere on Friday, and that's going to be a tricky maneuver in itself. Also, there's a nuclear generator aboard the lunar module as it heads for Earth tonight. It was to have been left on the moon to power the scientific experiment package, which was a main goal of this flight after moon landing. Mission Control assures us, though, that that generator poses no threat, that its protective shield will carry it safely through the 5,000-degree heat of re-entry into the atmosphere for what should be an uneventful ocean splashdown. For the situation with the astronauts now, as they prepare for the engine firing aimed at returning them to Earth, let's go to Nelson Benton in the CBS News Grumman simulator at Bethpage, Long Island.
The Apollo 13 crew is riding in the same configuration they would be riding in were they headed for a landing on the moon. Jim Lovell and Fred Hayes are in the lunar module. Jack Swigert is in the command module. But the engine firing they are preparing for this evening is not to put them into an approach pattern for the moon. Instead, it is to put them into a faster trajectory for home. At 9:40 p.m. Eastern Time, the commander will feed by computer power into the LEM's big descent propulsion engine. He will burn that engine for 4 minutes and 20 seconds, increasing the docked craft's speed by some 2,700 miles per hour. It is naturally different to make this burn this way. It was not planned to use these systems, but it is indeed a contingency plan. It is a plan that was simulated on the flight of Apollo 9 last year. It worked in theory then. It is hoped it will work in practice this time. Walter?
One of the real mysteries that perhaps close examination of the data telemetered back to Earth will solve, but which may never be solved, is what caused the explosion that caused this dangerous situation aboard Apollo 13. Was it perhaps a meteorite? At the moment, the thinking is rather against that for one reason. Let's take a look at what happened actually aboard the spacecraft, as nearly as we know. This is the command module up here. This is where the men ride. And this is the service module, which has the environmental supply equipment, air and oxygen, all that sort of thing, water, and supplies the power for this big engine, which is the engine that boosts the spacecraft out of the lunar orbit and back home, a rather important one, of course. And that's what's out, and they're having to use the lunar engine instead. Now, inside here, we can see what that looks like in there. Here are the cryogenic tanks of liquid oxygen down around 250 degrees below zero. That liquid oxygen is vented into the fuel cells, which then, through liquid oxygen and liquid hydrogen joining, make electricity, and a byproduct is water. One of those cryogenic tanks burst and caused an explosion. But why did it burst? Was it hit from the outside, or was there a structural failure or something else that happened inside? They're talking about impact, but on the other hand, the pressure went up momentarily just before it went down, and it seemed doubtful that that would have happened if it had been an impact by a meteoroid. However, that's to be studied. That's what happened. This tank in here burst, and the fuel cells were denied the liquid oxygen they need, no electrical power to supply this big engine. They've had to go on the backup power in the lunar modules. By doing that, they can't make the landing on the moon, and are depending now on the lunar module engine to get them home. Just before all that trouble started, Apollo 13 was being described as a nice, easy flight. The astronauts sent back a television broadcast to prove it. Fred Hayes demonstrated the hammock he would have used for sleeping while the lunar module Aquarius was on the moon. The mood was so lighthearted that John Swigert then volunteered for the almost obligatory free-floating demonstration in the command module, and that's Jim Lovell there, the space veteran of the group, returning to the Odyssey from the LEM, where he and Hayes had just completed an inspection trip. It's not likely that these any three men have ever waged such a dramatic battle so fully in the attention of the world. A foreign newspaper said the concern they create is as great as the work undertaken. It creates a human solidarity. For the reaction of their companions and families, first to Bruce Morton at Mission Control in Houston.
The atmosphere was businesslike, but the quotes were good. Chris Kraft, I think the chances are excellent. Flight Director Glenn Lunny, they're safe, but we have to keep it that way. Throughout the day, the men in this room and the support rooms around it have been experimenting with ways to keep it that way. Computers and simulators have pretended a lot. What happens if you junk the service module? What happens if you come down in the Atlantic or the Pacific? And the talk to the men in space has had a housewifely, budget-conscious ring. We think you can turn off this system. We'll save an amp or two of electricity. But for now, it all seems to be going well. Ed Rabel and Ike Pappas report on the families. Pappas was with Jack Swigert's father.
Well, I'm very happy that everything has turned out as well as it has. Of course, I'm still concerned, but I think this, with the hope that I have and the faith that I have, that everything will be all right.
How is Mrs. Schweigert holding up?
She's, I think, is probably kind of cracking up a little bit with this continual worry. She's probably more emotional than anyone would think. She hides it very well up to a point.
Dr. Schweigert, what are your thoughts of your son up there now?
Well, I'm just praying that he's doing everything that should be done, and that Lord will help him out in some way.
The Swigerts, a family of deep faith, insist that God is a fourth astronaut up there and that he will guide their son safely home. Ike Pappas, CBS News, Denver.
Throughout the day, a steady stream of friends to the homes of astronauts Lovell and Hayes. Some of the tension had eased since the announcement of the accident, but the crisis remained. Wives of other astronauts brought food and flowers to members of the families who maintained their calm. At the Lovell house, young son Jeffrey went off to nursery school with a friend after watching television reports about his father. The wives say they will remain secluded until their husbands have returned safely. They have refused to talk to newsmen. Here in the astronaut compound, a spirit of togetherness prevails this day. And so it is a time for waiting for the families of the astronauts, and in that time they seem to be holding up well. Ed Rabel, CBS News, Seabrook, Texas.
This most harrowing of man's adventures in space gripped all Americans today, and that includes the President of the United States. Dan Rather reports.
The President this evening drove through heavy rain to the Goddard Center, 18 miles outside Washington, for an extensive briefing on the drama in space. Talk included speculation about what happened to the spacecraft. Dr. John Clark and William Schneider of the Goddard facility and former astronaut Michael Collins, who accompanied the President, all answered questions. Mr. Nixon was told immediately at the White House last night when trouble first developed. He stayed up past midnight getting reports and was awakened at 3 a.m. for updated information. During today, frequent reports were relayed from Houston. The President praised the astronauts' grace under pressure and the operation of the entire NASA space team under stress. The President is going ahead with a White House dinner tonight for the visiting Prime Minister of Denmark, but a scheduled performance by pianists Ferranti and Teicher has been canceled to allow Mr. Nixon to monitor tonight's spacecraft rocket firing. Whether the President goes ahead with his scheduled Vietnam report to the nation on Thursday depends on when, how, and if the astronauts return. Dan Rather, CBS News, Washington.
Summing up, the abbreviated voyage of Apollo 13 is going all right now, with space experts saying chances of getting the crew home safely are good, providing nothing more goes wrong. The next crucial maneuver comes up later tonight to be covered live by CBS News at 9:30 Eastern Time.
This is today's Kent 100s. This has the great taste you've been looking for. Kent 100s, the only cigarette with a micronite filter, the most famous filter of them all. The filter that smooths the taste, yet gives you richness and satisfaction no other cigarette can equal. Pick up a pack of Kent 100s. After all, isn't right now a good time for a Kent? Kent 100s.
Let me remind you in conclusion to cut the school budget, Mr. Mayor, is to cut the future of our children. Tommy?
I only have one cavity.
We did it.
How did he do it? We switched to Crest.
Are you sure it was the Crest?
Well, look at the results. Best checkup ever. You know, that fluoride stuff works. The others we tried didn't have it. In our house, Crest is the cavity expert.
And isn't Crest accepted by the...
Right, by the American Dental Association.
If you're serious about cavities, have regular checkups, watch treats, and brush after eating with Crest. Fighting cavities is the whole idea behind Crest.
I don't use soap, and I bet I'm cleaner than you. I use Zest, deodorant Zest. It's not a soap, it's different. Zest leaves you feeling cleaner than soap. Look, soap leaves a soap film on you. Zest doesn't. So, deodorant Zest leaves you feeling cleaner than soap.
In Cambodia, where the communists have been making steady advances, Premier Lon Nol appealed for outside military arms aid. He did not specify any country, but his appeal apparently was directed to the United States. The Soviet Union and other communist nations have made clear they'll not help the regime that overthrew Prince Sihanouk. In recent days, North Vietnamese and Viet Cong troops have been particularly active in the rice-growing Cambodian provinces near the frontier of South Vietnam. Correspondent Bert Quint and a CBS News camera crew made a trip there, and the close call they had is described in this satellite report.
Like most of the border area, this is Viet Cong country. The Cambodian government says that it's in control, but the people who live near here know better. The last time I was up this road, which cuts through the rice fields of Cambodia's eastern border with Vietnam, about 10 days ago, there were government troops here, and a few kilometers on, at Kampong Track, there was a major outpost. Now, all the signs of communist occupation were present. The road empty, except for a few peasants on bicycles, afraid to look at the foreigners who had ventured up here. The fact that there hasn't been a Cambodian soldier seen for miles. The bridge that has been freshly burned with gasoline, like one down the road a bit, torn up apparently by a mine. Already having decided that to go beyond the bridge to where the woods began would be to invite being captured by the communists, as 8 other journalists have, we drove back toward the city of Svayrieng. But soon we spotted a small rice mill in a field. And because this is what it's all about, rice, this is why the communists are here and on the attack, because they're hungry, we stopped. As we moved up to film the farmers inside, we noticed a couple of soldiers, maybe 200 feet away. They were wearing khaki and carrying rifles. There was no doubt in our minds. These were Vietnamese communists, perhaps coming over here to pick up the rice. We figured that if we remained, we would be captured, like our colleagues. So we decided we would run. But first, cameraman Carl Sorensen tried to get a picture of the communists. He lifted his big movie camera to his eye, and maybe this is what saved us. Apparently, they thought that this was some kind of a weapon. Their hesitation gave us a chance to run. We piled into the car. By now, the soldiers were only about 100 feet away, and they opened fire with their rifles on full automatic burst. Fortunately, they were bad shots. Most of the hail of bullets whizzed past our little car. One round, though, as we sat and lay tumbled in the vehicle, spun by my hair and hit our French sound technician, Patrick Forrest. It tore through his arm and into his knee. We kept going, racing bullets, and now racing Patrick's loss of blood as well, on a 12-mile run for aid in Svayrieng. As we approached the city, we passed Cambodian troops lounging about, troops that rarely go on patrol because they know what they would find, and they don't really want to challenge the communists. They feel they're not yet strong enough. Our decision to run for it had cost us 1 wounded man, but we figured we had gotten off cheaply. The alternatives had been capture or death. The doctors tell us that this tough young Frenchman, Patrick Forrest, will be all right. But the meaning of this minor incident is clear. Just as was the case for so long in Vietnam, the communists own a lot more of the countryside than the government says they do. Bert Quint, CBS News, Svayrieng, Cambodia.
The United States has offered to supply Australia with 24 Phantom fighter bombers. The Aussies originally ordered the same number of F-111 jets, but technical problems and the frequent groundings had held up delivery of that controversial plane. Sweden is preparing a formal apology to the new U.S. ambassador to Stockholm, Dr. Jerome Holland, for a series of racial insults directed at him. Both last week and today, the 54-year-old Negro educator was the target of anti-American demonstrators who shouted, "Nigger, nigger, go home." Holland expressed personal resentment over the incident. American envoy Joseph Sisko flew to Israel from Cairo today, and he issued another appeal for both sides in the Middle East conflict to make greater efforts toward peace. Sisko gave no indication of what success, if any, he had in his talks with the Arabs.
When you got Kent, you got taste. It comes full-bodied through a filter that means smooth smoking, king size or 100s.
What a good time for a Kent!
One bowl cloudy, one bowl clear. It's a breakthrough in a floor wax, announcing crystal clear Aero Wax. The wax that doesn't dry cloudy won't turn yellow. Here's proof. In 2 crystal bowls, pour Aero Wax and this other leading wax. Let them dry. Look. The other wax dried cloudy, could turn yellow. Aero Wax doesn't dry cloudy, won't turn yellow. Get today's Aero Wax. The longer-lasting, crystal clear shine that doesn't dry cloudy, won't turn yellow.
Harper's Bazaar says, with knitted sweaters, wear knitted pants.
Wash them in Woolite.
17 says, knitted sweaters are made for knitted skirts.
Wash them in Woolite. Woolite safely soaks all washable knits clean in 3 minutes without shrinking, fading, stretching. For crochets, double knits, pantyhose, for all washable knits, the makers of over 30 million fine garments recommend cold water Woolite. Safely soaks knits clean in 3 minutes.
President Nixon has made his 3rd nomination for the Supreme Court seat, which has been vacant for almost a year. It's Federal Circuit Judge Harry Blackmun of Minnesota. The 61-year-old Blackman earlier won the strong endorsement of former Vice President Humphrey, also a Minnesotan. This could weaken any opposition from Senate liberals who had key roles in defeating the two previous nominees, Haynesworth and Carswell. The House has passed and sent to the President the bill raising the pay of federal workers by 6%, retroactive to last December 27th. The bill, part of the settlement of the mail strike, covers all of the government's more than 5 million employees, including servicemen. An additional 8% boost for postal workers is to be considered along with postal reform. The Chief of Naval Operations, Admiral Thomas H. Moorer, has been chosen by President Nixon as new chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. With Senate confirmation, the 58-year-old Moorer will succeed retiring General Earl Wheeler, who has had the post for 6 years. A report on the Admiral now from Stephen Rowan.
The Alabama-born aviator who survived Pearl Harbor and a couple of dunkings in the Pacific when the Japanese shot both a patrol plane and a rescue ship out from under him has been the Navy's top man for almost 3 years and says he welcomes his new assignment.
Anyone that's been in the service as long as I have feels very good over an assignment such as this, which amounts to meeting the top position.
This is what it's all about, Admiral, getting to this job?
No, certainly not. I think that I came into the service for the purpose of serving my country, and the opportunity to do this for an additional period of time is one that I am very grateful for and I look forward to.
There's been some suggestion in recent weeks that you didn't particularly want this job, that you would have rather played golf.
Well, I think that one always looks at a very difficult assignment like this with mixed emotions, but I can assure you I'm going to give it my best.
The Navy was long overdue in getting the chairmanship, and Admiral Moore undoubtedly is the best qualified man around with powerful friends on Capitol Hill. He's a powerfully persuasive man who wants an even bigger carrier fleet and a new force of submarines carrying long-range missiles. With his elevation, those dreams seem closer to reality. But in the Navy, reality is also 49-year-old Admiral Elmo Zumwalt as Moore's successor, a clear signal from Secretary Laird that a lot of old admirals are on the way out. Stephen Rowan, CBS News, Washington.
In Boston, a federal judge has blocked the release tomorrow of the record of the secret inquest into Mary Jo Kopechne's death in Senator Edward Kennedy's car. The federal judge issued a temporary injunction in connection with a suit by the inquest stenographer who contends that he has the sole right to sell copies of that transcript. The stenographer filed the federal suit after the Massachusetts Supreme Court rejected his claim. Jackie Robinson, the former baseball player, urged Congress today not to legalize marijuana, and he cited the example of his own son to back up his Senate testimony. Robinson said his son, now 23, is being treated for heroin addiction and that usage of marijuana preceded the harder drug. Robinson called for greatly increased spending to deal with drugs, saying we should cut back on defense spending and trips to the moon and invest in kids. The Nixon administration indicated today it plans to give doctors more freedom in using methadone as a substitute for heroin in treating addiction. Some authorities contend that methadone satisfies the craving for heroin, is cheaper, and is less harmful, but it too is addictive. More than 80,000 Teamsters are on strike from California to North Carolina, protesting a tentative national wage agreement reached by their leadership and the truckers. The walkouts have idled almost 40,000 auto workers and other industrial employees. Meanwhile, the 20-day-old air controller strike appeared virtually at an end with the return to work by many controllers in New York and Chicago. The averages were off substantially on the New York Stock Exchange today. Volume was 10,800,000 shares. The average price per share lost 31 cents on the New York Exchange, 26 cents on the American Exchange.
Sometime soon, you're likely to see one of these cards. Meanwhile, we'd like to tell you about the man behind that card, your New York Life agent. For one thing, he's a full-time life insurance agent. That's his career. He was carefully chosen and thoroughly trained. What's more, he goes on studying so he can help you build a sound program of financial security. The more he knows about his business, the better he can serve you. Maybe that's why New York Life agents earn far more than their share of professional awards. We're proud of them, and they're proud of their company, one of the world's oldest, largest life insurance companies.
Mr. Hewitt, come on in.
That's the man behind the card, your New York Life agent. He's a good man to know.
Some thoughts now on Apollo 13 from Eric Severide, who is concerned that this unhappy flight will be remembered long after the tension and the excitement of the moment have eased. Eric?
Life and work go on here in the capital as everywhere else, while the three imperiled young men circle the moon and aim their crippled spaceship toward the Earth and life. But the quiet tension is felt everywhere, and few can address their work with full attention. The accident has come at a bad time for this government and the people in it. Too much has been happening these last 2 weeks or so, too much of it adverse, painful, and acrimonious. Everyone is thinking of the three men, first of all, but there is a kind of sub-knowledge that if a tragedy occurs, it will be one of the most dramatic and dramatized of all time, and could only deepen the spiritual miasma that already weighs upon this national capital. So there are a few rather feeble attempts here and there to guess what may happen when this drama is ended. Whether the men make it back or not, there are bound to be weeks of investigation, and the Apollo programs as a whole are bound to be affected. Had this happened during the first moon landing attempt, efforts would probably have been redoubled. But Americans have twice walked the moon already, and the public mood has changed. Moon exploration still excites the scientists for valid scientific reasons, but not many others outside their ranks. That very difficult question may be raised on a national scale. When is enough enough? As it has long since been raised concerning both nuclear weapons and the Vietnam War. This chilling adventure in space should at the least end the general feeling that there is a mechanical, mathematical perfectionism about these fantastic flights. It is strange that the feeling took hold in view of John Glenn's danger when a re-entry device came loose, the narrow escape of Armstrong and Scott when their vehicle went into a violent spin, and of course the fire on the pad that took 3 astronauts' lives 3 years ago. Technical failures are human failures. Computers do only what men tell them to do. But if a meteorite struck Apollo 13, that was truly chance over which men have no control. So the 3 astronauts head toward home across the desert of space, their oxygen and water running low. Perhaps the story will be seen one day as a parable. This Earth is also a spinning spaceship. All of us are astronauts, and our oxygen and water are also diminishing. But we have no place to go. Walter?
And that's the way it is. Tuesday, April 14th, 1970. This is Walter Cronkite, CBS News. Good night.
It's getting late. She ought to be back by now. How long does it take to hunt for a fur? I should have let her take the vine. Honey! Oh, no. I should have guessed. The grope. The grope's got her. If I told her once, I told her 100 times. Irene, use the yellow pages when you go hunting, then the grope can't get you. The lions, maybe, but not the grope. Well, honey!
The grope preys on people who don't know where to find what they're hunting for, turning a search into a jungle hunt. That's why smart hunters use the yellow pages, because the yellow pages tells you where it's at, and if you know where it's at, the grope can't get you. So let your fingers do the walking through the yellow pages.
Honey!
Direct from our newsroom in New York, in color, this has been the CBS Evening News with Walter Cronkite. CBS News will broadcast a special report on the critical burn that will speed the Apollo 13 astronauts' return to Earth. Coverage begins at 9:30, 8:30 Central Time. Holland Against the Sea, a National Geographic special tonight at 7:30 Eastern Time on CBS.